rock stars, welcome to Epiphanish, a podcast that will change how you perceive everything. Maybe. And for you to recognize where you have choice and options in your own life. I'm your host and guide, Lisa Westgate, an award-winning mental health advocate, best-selling author, rock star, life and business strategist of almost a decade, and mum of three. Remember to share this episode and your Epiphanish moment on socials, and please like, follow, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms. Welcome to today's episode of Epiphanish. I am joined by the incredible Kim Savige. Kim is a Neurodiverse Family Support Specialist, NLP Practitioner, coach, author, mother to a genuinely incredible ND kid, and is herself neurospicy and a good friend of mine. And it's wonderful to have you here, Kim. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited to chat today.
It's so exciting.
We're gonna make things up as we go along. We're gonna do our best. We'll probably make mistakes, and all of that is totally okay. So Kim, because we need a little structure in our lives, which is not my natural state, I've prepared a few questions. And I thought if we could just start with giving people a bit of context around before we sort of get into your speciality, and I really want to explore being what a neurodiverse family support specialist is. I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your own self-improvement and self-empowerment journey, given that that's really, I guess, the thread that ties this podcast together.
So just an easy one off the bat there.
Just a warm-up question.
Let me try and do the dot point version. The short version is I was a paramedic for 22 years on road working with students. I was teaching at uni. I was working by myself doing permanent nights for the last kind of few years. At some point that has to catch up with you, and it caught up with me spectacularly, to the point where on my way home one day I lived on a little farmlet, and on my way home I was calculating in my head how fast I would need to go to hit a particular tree to unalive myself. So that was my crisis point. It took quite a while from that moment for people to understand and then accept that I was not okay. It seemed to come out of the blue, but in hindsight, there were quite a few precipitating factors and clues, but they got missed. People are not necessarily looking for those things, or they have assumptions about you and your ability to manage stress. Working by yourself, you don't get seen very often, and it's certainly an industry, same as VIPOL, where if you ask for help, there's always that fear you'll be judged by peers and management. There's a fear. So fell apart. The next bit's where you step in. The psychiatrist told me in very polite terms that I was going into the Austin to the PTSD inpatient ward as a voluntary patient for up to a week. However, the caveat very politely was, if at the end of that 5 days we feel you are not well, we will decide to keep you. So I was going voluntarily with the idea that I would be locked up and not let out.
Right, that's an interesting interpretation of voluntary.
Well, it was sort of partial voluntary, you know. Tomato.
And just for clarity, no harm, no foul. Like, I know people that have been in that unit multiple times, had great benefit. Everything that Kim and I talk about on this, and you can probably, if you're listening to this and it's the beginning of your Epiphanish experience overall as a podcast, you know, myself and the guests, we're only ever speaking through our own experiences, and there's zero judgment on any pathways that anyone chooses to go down. Having said that,
adjustment at all. I was prepared to go.
Yeah.
And then, to be honest, it might have been a random message on a Facebook or something else, and this incredible chick rang me and said, I'm Lisa, I was in an AMBO, I've done all this really cool stuff, I have PTSD, I don't have it anymore, what do you reckon? I can help you. And I'm on the phone going, fuck off.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
You're trying to sell me a program and I don't have any money because I'm on work cover. I'm a red hot mess and it's just too hard. And then I hung up the phone, and then I think we had a second conversation where I thought, I'll give it a crack. When is it? And coincidentally, it was the same week I was supposed to go and register at the Austin. And I thought about it and I spoke to the psychiatrist, and he said, do you know what? If you think this will help, you can absolutely do that. However, afterwards, if, and I know he meant when, if you still don't feel well, do you agree to go to the Austin? And I said, yep, absolutely. So he put that on hold, and I turned up at your training, and the first day I sat in the room and hadn't met you before, and I look at photos of that now and I'm horrified at the state I was in. And I still remember you looking at me from the whiteboard and telling me that I was responsible and I was accountable for my feelings, my emotions, my reactions, the way that my PTSD was treating me, the way the ambulance service was treating me, the way the universe was treating me. And you landed that right in front of me, tied up with the bow, and went, this is yours.
With love.
And well, not love at that stage because I'd never met you. And I still remember in that room full of strangers, slumping in my chair, crossing my arms and looking at you.
If you had been able to shoot lasers out of your eyes, I would have been dead many times.
You'd be dead. You would be a smouldering pile of ashes on the ground, and I would have blown you like a dandelion.
Yeah.
I remember being so angry with you, and in my head that narrative of how fucking dare she? This happened to me. They did this to me. My job did this to me. The services did. This happened at me.
Right.
It's my fault. I didn't ask for this. This is not what I wanted. And I just, my favourite word, cogitated around in there for a little bit. And I sat through the rest of the day, and my promise to myself was I'm going to sit through the day, and if I still hate her guts, when 5 o'clock rolls around, I don't have to come back. I can go to the Austin tomorrow. And at the end of that week, standing up, getting that certificate from you with everyone in the group was probably one of the most empowering, emotional.
Yeah, we should have got tissues. Sorry.
I wouldn't be here if not for that little nudge and that push out of my little window of tolerance and that suggestion that I had a choice when I felt all my choices had been taken away from me. And I was convinced it was personal. If not for that little nudge and the work that we did through that training and the therapeutic work we all did with and for each other, and those little moments that led to growth upon growth, and the growth led to more interest in more growth and to more questions. And if not for that, I hand on heart, don't believe my child would still have a mother, because I wouldn't be here, or I would be a shell of the mother that he knew. And it was really hard.
Yeah.
That week was hard. I had to dig in there and look at some really, really awful things. And I don't mean cases I'd been to, because the cases you go to aren't the issue. I had to go and look at me, at my choices, at my complete lack of self-awareness. awareness of my own values and place in the world. I had to look at how I parented. And at the time, at that moment, I was not a good parent. I was not a good parent. I wasn't a good human. I had to look at choices I'd made, things I'd said and done. I had to look at my entire life. I had to go back and look at my childhood. And I had to reassess everything in my life. The other thing that happened partially as a result of that was that I lost every single coping mechanism I'd spent 45 years curating. I had beautiful layers and layers of onion skin. I had masks, I had facades, I had practice responses, I had facial expressions. They were all gone. I had nothing. And I'd been Kim Ambo for 22 years. I didn't even have me anymore because I didn't know who I was without the uniform.
Yeah.
So mid-40s, PTSD, suicidal, shit mum, shit person, no identity, no idea of my own values, no idea where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And I had to start again. I had to build me. I had to go and dig around in there and find all the bits that were still there that I wanted. I had to make peace with the bits that I no longer wanted and learn how to let them go.
Yeah.
And I had to reorganize the archives.
We
And
had
it was really
to,
hard.
but you also got to, right? You got to read
Yes.
you know, and I think in that 8 days was like, you know, burning the place to the ground. And then you spent the next 12 to 18 months rebuilding through choice, rebuilding from a place of conscious choice about what are the bits I want to keep, what are the bits I can get rid of, what do I want that I've not had before that I want to learn how to do, you know, and put that into the mix.
And I think the biggest gift that you gave me was the understanding that I have choice. You didn't give me the choice, but you gave me the permission, which I also had to give myself, but you gave me the gift of making me realize I had choice. And in that moment, I had to choose to keep wearing that hat of depression and anxiety and vomiting and anger and self-loathing and living in a house with the blinds down all the time, being a terrible human, or choose, consciously, actively choose to take that hat off and step back into my life.
Yeah.
And be a parent and see where that would go, because the alternative was not flash. And the reality is I don't have enough fingers and toes to count the number of colleagues, many who are friends from that career, that are no longer here because they hit that same point and they made different choices because they didn't know there was another alternative, because we all follow the same path. We either retired early ill health, we finished our careers jaded and angry and putting people at risk, or we checked out permanently. And we unfortunately worked for a service that knew that was the game plan and sat back and watched it happen. And I didn't like any of those choices.
Yeah. And that awareness and bearing witness to that being the status quo, is a significant precipitating factor in this podcast existing, right? Is because I'm so passionate about people having that flash of awareness that they have choice. Wait a second, this is my life. I get to choose what it looks like. I can choose how I feel. I don't have to be at the whim of the weather and the traffic and my boss and the bank account, and like you have more choice about your existence than you probably think you do. And I think that's when people feel that they have no choice, is when they make, you know, really life threatening and life-ending decisions. And you know, you and I have had lots of exposure to that world, and later podcasts we're definitely going to talk more about mental health and suicide in particular. So, you know, but that awareness that there are people that didn't know that they had other options and they made the choice that they felt was most available to them, is kind of why we're here and why we're having these conversations.
I think even at a lesser level though, Lisa, if you look at parenting is a great example, like obviously it's what we're talking about today, but parenting is a great example. We become parents and we just feel like we don't have choices now. Oh, I don't have a life. I can't do what I want. I can't have a career. I can't be successful. I can't complain about things. I have to be everything for everyone, everywhere, all the time. I can't parent differently than my parents. And that's not a conscious, this is what I worked out in all this growth. The majority of the population are not ever consciously aware of anything other than their day-to-day. Oh, I've got to work tomorrow. I've got to set the alarm. I've got to pack my lunch. I go to work. I do my work. I hate the job. I come home and then I've got to cook dinner. And then I've got to, we're not consciously getting up going, what are my values? What makes me tick? What do I want from the world? What do I expect from the world? And what can I give the world? And it's really easy to become jaded and angry and so wound up in I'm miserable and no one understands what my life's like, as opposed to I'm not happy with my life. So what am I going to do about that? Because if I'm waiting for a partner or a family member or a friend or the government or my job to step in, they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And again, it's not always conscious either. People might love me and care, but it's not their job to fix my shit. It's not their job to clean up my mental health or my house or feed my kid. That's on me. I chose to have a kid. I chose to work. I chose to have a mortgage. I chose to have a menagerie. I didn't choose the responsibilities that come with that. And I think from that point where you dumped it all on me and I wanted to stab you in the face to now, I honestly, I look back at that now and it's like I'm looking at another human. It's really hard to fathom that version of me. And it's only 3 or 4 years. Let's be honest. It wasn't
it was
that long ago.
2020, I think.
Or 2020, 2021.
21.
I look back at that.
Lockdown, so it must have been 21.
Yeah, I look back at that skin sack that was supposed to be me. And there's this real cognitive dissonance to me around that.
I think it's because it's so far when you live a what I call a disempowered life, where you're running on patterns of behavior and habits of thought and habits of action, and you're just on that Groundhog Day hamster wheel where you wake up and today's going to be the same as yesterday, which will be the same as tomorrow. When you're living that life, as opposed to what we probably like refer to as like conscious parenting or conscious living, it's an awakening, it's an engagement, that we're living life rather than just surviving on that. Well, I have to eat 3 times a day, so I'll eat food. They're so parallel and different ends of the spectrum of existence to living. There's such a different way to live your life when you're
you miss out on so much.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't know what you don't know. Like you said, maybe before we started recording, like it's not, no one opts in for that. That's just kind of the status quo that emerges. No one goes, well, I'm just going to live a very checked out kind of life. Like it happens. And often, unless we choose voluntarily to push ourselves outside of our zone of familiar. So those people that have recently taken themselves off to Sydney and walked on hot coals and had Tony Robbins yell at them for a few days, right? So unless you go and seek out something, an experience like that, or life pushes you to the edge and over the edge into the unknown, the uncomfortable, the unfamiliar, and you're forced to reassess, unless either of those kind of things happen, you just loop, right? You play the same record in the same groove over and over again. So it's only in the conversation of awareness that you kind of realize that you are disempowered, that you're giving your power away to the traffic, the boss, the whatever. Um, and you don't have the choices that you would like to have. But it's like it's only in the positive that you realize that you're living the negative if we force it into a polarity.
Yeah. And not all of us can afford to go get yelled at by Tony for a weekend, you know?
Or
Like,
want to.
yeah, more to the point.
Yeah. Not for me. Again, no judgment.
To each their own. Yeah, so and there's that point where you're just so stuck that you can't see out of it. And from that moment that I had that awareness brought to me with a sledgehammer to the face, I knew I had a choice and I had to make the most of it. And I knew I had a little boy. My son was only, I can't even remember how, it's the years blend now because I don't count days anymore. But he was only 8 or 9.
Mm.
And he had a mum who cried all the time and couldn't get out of bed and didn't want to do fun stuff. And, you know,
if I had
to make a choice.
If I had to choose between the hamster wheel or the genuine challenge of radical self-ownership, I would always choose self-ownership. And it always reminds me of that there's that character in the Matrix. For all the nerds out there, you'll appreciate this reference. So there's a character in the Matrix, obviously Neo, spoilers, Neo chooses to, it's 20 years old if you haven't seen it by now. He chooses to, have the veil lifted and see the reality for what it is and all that.
Take the red pill.
And there is a character that opts in to go back to the falseness, the fake world, right? He chooses and says, you know what? Actually, I kind of don't want to know. And I think it's an interesting, like, I cannot relate at all to that character, right? Like, and I'm sure that there are people that go, you know what? Ignorance is bliss. I'd go back to just, running the loops and not have to make hard choices or not have to confront all those things that you described earlier, right? Like you got to face a lot of it's tough. It's not an easy pathway, and I think I said this to you at the time, when I velvet hammered you, that it's not easy, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and there definitely were times early on where I would have to check myself because my brain would be going, this is too hard, this is too hard, you can't do this, it's too hard, don't do it, stop, just stay where you are. Stay where you are.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
And you've made progress. You don't want to kill yourself anymore. You're not dribbling from the meds anymore. We could just stay here. This is nice. We could get a pension. We could, and at the time, that probably would have been a viable option and I potentially would have been happy. But once that little switch was flipped,
you can't unknow.
You can't unhear. You can't unknow.
Yeah.
And you can go back a little bit and dabble, but it's really icky. It's icky. And I think everyone has the right to make that decision for themselves. If you are comfortable where you are, if you have found your tribe and you are comfortable where you are and you are feeling validated and safe and like that's where you need to be, then you know what? You stay there. If going backwards for now, because no one ever stays backwards. I've had people want to go backwards and they never stay there. They start, waving their hands and,
You dip in a toe.
And they come back.
You've got to try the grass is greener, right? You've got to test it out. We often test things, you've got to see where the limits are. So you might dip a toe back into an old thinking or an old lifestyle or an old behavior, an old relationship dynamic. And you go, yeah, okay, this, and I think to get, I guess, I don't know, sometimes they use like spiritual kind of language, but it's just no longer in alignment right? It's just there's not integrity in that anymore. Whereas when that was your life, there was, and there's no issue with that. But as we grow and we shift and we elevate and we evolve, it's you try and revisit. You're like, you know what? Like if you've ever gone through like a health kick, and you're like, I'm exercising, I'm doing, and you're on one of those benders, and then you have like a slovenly day, and you actually like it feels gross.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas like maybe that was your life 3 months earlier before on the health, but now it's out of alignment. It doesn't feel right.
It doesn't. And the other thing is that that little internal voice you have, your internal narrative, will slay you for that. It's not, oh, it's slovenly and it feels icky because I've been so healthy. It's the voice in your head going, you lazy old mole, you're going to get fat. You just ate 2 rows of chocolate with 14 cups of tea watching Netflix. You haven't showered for 2 days. You fucking and you believe, and I learned this from someone else once called Lisa, the voice in your head is the loudest voice you will ever hear. And if that voice is being an asshole, you're never going to get anywhere. And so a lot of the work I do, particularly with kids, is changing that internal monologue, changing the way that narrative runs, getting people to focus on the glimmers. If that voice says something good, hang on to that, high five yourself, write it down, put it on the fridge, whatever you need to do. And then name that other voice, the negative one. And whenever it pipes up, tell it to fuck off. Give it a name, call it Chuck, fuck off, Chuck, and listen to the positive voice, because the negative one gets in, and that's the voice that tells you you don't deserve a better life. It's the one that tells you that if you look after yourself, you're being selfish, or the one that tells you if you leave your family for a bit to go work on yourself, that, you're doing them a disservice, or if you work, you're a shit mum, or like all those things. And they're internal monologues, but they've come from somewhere, haven't they? And they've come from intergenerational messaging and trauma that says, well, I did it tough, so you have to do it tough. My parents smacked me and I'm fine, so I'll smack my kids. And those things follow through because we don't know better,
And I think it's really interesting, like what's mind-blowing, if we can go back a step, is you've even introduced the concept of choice around that inner dialogue, right? You don't have to take it for granted. You don't have to listen to everything that voice says. You can actually empower yourself to choose and go, actually, mate, that's unhelpful. Thank you, but no. Like you can actually be discerning around listening to that internal voice. You don't have to take everything on face value. You don't have to believe everything it says. Its opinion is sometimes very invalid. So even introducing, like, I know that there's going to be people going, wait, hang on a minute, I don't have to just sit and listen to that abuse in my own mind. Just the idea that you can choose and you can actually have a return dialogue with that voice, acknowledging it. I understand that you're trying to keep me safe, keep me small, keep me whatever. Thanks very much. I'm good. See you later. That in itself is potentially world rocking for people, because I think until that's an option, right? We sit there and we listen to it and we're like, God, I really should speak to myself more nicely, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to change it. Incidentally, if you want to examine the language you're using, feel free to check out my mini course available on my website about just that language. And the reason I created that was because it is such a simple but powerful shift to make in the way that you are speaking to yourself, the way that you're speaking to others. I'm sure we'll do another episode about how important language is in that. I just want to jump on something that you've alluded to a couple of times, is those lessons that you learned in your own, transformational experience of going from that person that was going to get admitted to an inpatient unit to now you're in a position where you're supporting other families, you're helping people with their socialization and mental health and all sorts of amazing things. Those lessons that you learned, can you just, I guess, give us some context around how that transformation and the changes in that, how that affected your parenting specifically? And how did you change as a mum from being a shit mum, as you said, to um, not a shit mum?
A
Now
morally better mum.
we'd have to ask your little man what he reckons. I'm pretty sure he'd say you're an awesome mum now. How what were some of those lessons that you realized? That's actually I can utilize that in terms of my role as a parent.
Oh, how long have you got? I'll try and kind of pluck out some of the key ones. I think probably the biggest thing that happened for me that I try and get with my clients is radical self-acceptance. When you radically accept yourself as you are, where you are at right now, and you can genuinely forgive yourself and be kind to yourself and accept yourself and change that in a dialogue, and you start to notice how you feel when that happens, you'll never ever want to yell at, abuse, scream, name call, belittle, or talk badly to anyone ever again in your life. Like, I think that's the key, because no one sets out to be a bad parent, and I copped a lot of flack very early on when my son was born because I gentle parented. That doesn't mean parenting without boundaries. It doesn't mean parenting without rules. It means parenting without expectation of respect just because I'm older. It was about having to earn his respect and treating him as an equal human being who was learning about the world. He's not a mini me. He doesn't have to perform for me or meet my expectations. He doesn't owe me anything. He didn't choose to be here. I think when you flip that around and you can look at yourself with compassion and kindness and grace, it's much easier to look at your child with compassion and kindness and grace. And I heard this great thing from a pediatrician online once. And he said, when you're in the moment and you're elevated and you feel like your kid's driving you mad and you are going to explode, just consciously make the decision right in that moment to look at your child with kind eyes. And when he said it, I laughed. And the next time my son threw a wobbly, I'm like, kind eyes, how do I do kind eyes? And the effort involved in itself is a circuit breaker. So by the time I'd processed what muscles I had to move and how to relax my eyes and not look like I was, off my chops on something illegal, and my whole posture changed. So in that probably only 20 seconds, I had to physically uncontort my face. Is that a word? Uncontort my face and look at this little person learning about the world and expecting me to teach him and try and put that kind face on. I couldn't be angry, because the only thing that can come from kind eyes is love and grace and compassion.
Yeah, they say kind eyes, kind words, kind heart, right?
Absolutely. And that was the start. It's not easy. Please don't anyone watching this think that I'm super mum and I don't yell and I don't lose my shit and I don't forget, what size shoes he wears. I aim for about an 80-20 mix.
We have it. We have an 80-20 rule on the podcast. Absolutely.
Yep. I do 80-20 for myself.
Super mum, 20%, gritted teeth. If you don't go to bed, I swear to God, right?
Yep.
And that's okay, because we're humans. Like,
and
we're humans.
Yes.
Fine. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think when you can look at yourself with grace and kindness, it's easier to look at other people with grace and kindness. And I then realized that the way, not all.
Oh dear.
Were causing harm to my child. And instead of justifying it, and that's how I was parented.
It's okay. We lost you, but you're back.
Okay. instead of justifying or getting defensive, but that's how I was parented, and I was a single parent for 6 years, and I'm stressed and I work and my kid's hard to parent and blah, 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 blah. Instead of trying to justify it with that, I suddenly went, well, hang on, how do I change that? What are the good bits from my childhood? What were the great things my parents did? I'm going to keep those and adjust those. And what are some other things I want to start incorporating so that I can connect with my child and have a genuine, respectful relationship with him rather than a power and control battle all the time? Because that feels sickening. And quite compliant children who obey because they're terrified of consequences or punishments or smacks or yelling are not learning anything useful. Unfortunately, what they're learning is that the bigger, scarier, louder, stronger person gets their way.
Wow.
And so then how do they do their relationships with their buddies at school and with other people? And when we...
That's massive. Hang on,
you want a mic drop moment?
Let's hit pause. That's actually really massive, right? So kids that are parented through fear and punishment and inherent respect, you'll respect me because I'm your parent, blah, those sorts of mentalities, which a lot of us were raised with, and those kids learn that the biggest, scariest, loudest person dominates, wins the conversation, wins at life, right? And I project, are more likely to want to grow up to be the loudest, scary. They want to be in the power position.
Because they're disempowered every other second of the day.
Right. And you and I have had lots of conversations around this in the past, is, you know, when we look at something like a school bully, we want to know where that behavior is coming from, right? Because kids that are bullies, that's a behavior. Behavior is information. Where is that kid being bullied and learning that being the bully is a good thing, right?
And those kids are not bullying because they want to hurt other children. There are no naughty, bad children. There are absolutely, I think we need to remove the word naughty from the vernacular, because all behavior is communication. Just because I can't understand what the message is that's coming at me doesn't mean that it's not the right message. I'm just not responding in the right way.
Yeah.
And so
educating also around, like, for me and for my kids, it was a really big shift, separating the child from the behavior, you know. And so if you do a bad thing, doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad kid. And good kids, like inherently good human beings, can sometimes do bad things, right? In the most basic and binary of terms, right? So the behavior is not necessarily reflective of the essence of that human being. The behavior is telling you something. Get like, you know, we've talked a lot about the power of curiosity and compassion. And so get compassionately curious about what is that behavior telling you? What is causing that? Why are they doing that? What are they seeking in that behavior? You know, one of the things I know that we've discussed a lot is this badging of certain behaviors as attention seeking, but as a negative, right? As a negative, like it's a problem. Oh, so they're dismissed as attention seeking behaviors.
Manipulative.
Pardon?
Or manipulative. I heard someone the other day.
Manipulative, yes.
Call a 1-year-old manipulative because they cried at bedtime, so mum would give them another hug. I'm like,
yeah. A 1-year-old cannot have manipulative intent. Like, they can't even form that in their brain. Like, it's just, I'm at the point now where I'm like, it doesn't even make logical sense that would, like, it doesn't. But I think it's important to change, again, for me, like as a language nerd, I would encourage someone to say, yes, that's exactly what they are. They are attention-seeking behaviors. Correct. Which doesn't mean that they are dismissible. It means that we need to investigate, why is this person seeking attention, regardless of age, right? This can be kids, adults, whatever. It's an attention seeking behavior. What kind of attention do they need that they're not getting that
Yes.
they're doing these behaviors, right? So, yes, exactly. It is attention seeking, correct. And then, that's a beginning of an investigative process. That's not going, oh, it's just an attention seeking behavior. I just really want to ask you a couple of questions. So, you've spoken about naughty kids and bad kids. There's kind of no such thing as bad kid. Are there bad parents? So parents potentially are unawakened, repeating patterns of behavior. Are they bad parents?
No one sets out to be a bad parent. Absolutely no one sets out. When we don't know, we don't know. And in particular, I live in a region with one of the highest rates of intergenerational trauma from family violence in the state. Like we're, I think, in the top 5 out of the 79 council areas in Victoria. That's not people getting up every morning deciding, I'm going to be a prick to my kid today, and then I'm going to go yell at Centrelink. They're not planning to do that. That's not when they set their alarm at night time. All right, tomorrow I've got to go buy milk and bread, kick the dog, smack my kid, and scream at a teacher. No one does that. And it's so easy, I think, for people to make judgments. I always got judged because my kid's bouncy, noisy, very upfront. He wants to talk to everyone. So he was labelled naughty and out of control, and I was labelled the bad mum and but I have a neurodiverse kid who can't sit still, who can't make eye contact. I have not and never will force him to respect or talk to adults or hug Auntie Joan or, but that's because I know more now. I didn't know that when I first had him. My parents didn't know that. There's still people teaching stranger danger, but we know full well now that stranger danger is actually harmful for children. We can have another podcast about that. Stranger danger is not harmful because we know that in the majority of cases of child abuse, sexual assault, grooming,
it's not a stranger.
Kidnapping, it's people that know the child. And if they're terrified and they don't trust their inner voice, because they're always being shut down. You're not upset. You're all right. That didn't hurt. You're okay. Stop whinging. Go to your room until you can calm down. Stop crying. And if we spoke to our best friend like that, they wouldn't be our best friend anymore. So why do we get to do that to a little person?
I think it's really key that those phrases and that minimization, what it teaches is for kids to not listen to themselves. Like, oh, okay, well, the signals I'm getting from within my own body and within my own mind, they're incorrect, and this other person knows better than me. And the relationship between that and people-pleasing behavior is definitely probably an entire another episode. Yeah, right. It's when there is a danger in teaching kids inadvertently, again, to not trust themselves. And I know lots of adults that have trouble with, their food behaviors and losing weight and all sorts of stuff because they have learnt to not trust the signals from their body, right? So this has wide-ranging negative effects when you learn to dismiss what your body and yourself is telling you about dangerous situations and whether you should go down that alley or whether you should go back to this person's house, or if we are taught to dismiss these, oh, I don't know if that, that's unnerving, or it doesn't feel right, or I'm a little unsettled, but we've trained ourselves and we've been trained as kids to kind of, brush it off, ignore it. It's probably nothing, stand up, dust yourself off, you'll be right. The follow-on effects of that teaching it can be pretty profound.
And it's obvious to me now, but it wasn't obviously not too long ago. But that behavior from adults, shush, stop crying, stop making a scene, behave yourself, the gritted tooth in the supermarket, stop screaming.
The pinch. Have you seen
Yeah, the little pinch, or the eyebrow.
Is one of the I think it's the Duchess, I think it's Williams Mrs. the Duchess of
Yeah, she does the pinch.
whatever of Wales she is now. Yes, she does the quiet little pinch of behave yourself, obviously, because there's 24/7 cameras in their face.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up, the pinch was one of my grandmother's moves.
And you know what I realized somewhere along the way is that parents who fall back unconsciously, smacking, yelling, pinching, stop, shush, don't make a scene, it's their discomfort.
Absolutely.
That's their unresolved trauma. That's their inner child that didn't get heard, didn't get loved, was forced to eat every mouthful on their plate, even if they felt sick or didn't like it, because there's children starving in Africa, I used to be sat at the table and my mum would break it down into mouthfuls for, look, you've only got 7 mouthfuls left. And I'd be sitting half off my chair ready to run. She wasn't a terrible mum. My mum was incredibly progressive for the time. But her and my dad grew up where food was scarce, money was scarce,
Absolutely.
family violence wasn't talked about. There was no
Waste.
money.
Yeah, you don't waste food, you don't waste money, as if the job of food is anything but to sate the individual. Like if you've had enough, then food's done its job. Like it's not.
Whereas now with my kids, she like, no one can eat in the lounge room with the carpet, but here you go, little Lord Fauntleroy, here's your towel and here's your hand rolled up pancakes. And would you like an ice? You're full, that's okay. You don't have to eat it all.
Look, grandparents, I tell you, it's a whole other set of rules.
And I sit there going,
what? That would never
this
have happened. I think that's why they enjoy grandparenting, is because like, yeah, but I send them back. It's not the same, right? Yeah.
But I also know that my parents worked bloody hard and they did better than their parents because they learned more and they knew more and they were more progressive. And I never felt unsafe as a child. But their patterns of parenting that they've picked up from the generation and the generation, and I have intergenerational trauma on both sides of my family. I have definite neurospicy on at least one side. And I go back to the Irish potato famine, convicts, women working in brothels, dying in child. That's all embedded in my genes. If, a lot of people don't kind of consider that. But I've got my mum's genes and her trauma. She's got her mum's, like, we carry that stuff in our cells at a cellular level. We're not conscious of it. Yeah. And it impacts how we do things. And those patterns, well, that's how I was raised and I got smacked and I had to do that. And so you have to do that. Conscious parenting, to eventually Billy Connolly back to the point, conscious parenting is literally just consciously being aware of how you treat your child. And is this thing I'm about to say or do with my child going to hurt them or help them? If I yell at my kid, I'm going to frighten them. If I call them names or tell them that I yelled at them because they made me angry, they grow up feeling they're responsible for adults and adults' behavior, and they're on edge all the time trying to mitigate risk. Or mum yells and screams and smacks because I'm a terrible human, maybe all adult. And then they go through life hypervigilant, like I'm the reason that mum loses her shit, when in actual fact, it's mum and her triggers and her unresolved stuff and her discomfort when her child is acting out and struggling with regulation that leads to that. If we tell the child it's their fault, they believe that. And children can't tell the difference between you telling them their behavior was not okay and you telling them they're not okay and you don't love them. They're the same thing to kids, right up till they're in their 20s. It's the same thing. The other one is, I'm so disappointed in you. I thought you knew better. What? Nothing will crush a kid more. But when my kid was little, I thought that was okay because I didn't know different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not yelling. So, just to you used a term that I just want to jump on, and then we'll finish up shortly. I'm just conscious of time. So, you use the term neurospicy as someone who works with neurodiverse families, and I'll probably get the terms wrong.
And I'm not disappearing. I'm just plugging in my charger again because the dog's pulled it out the wall. But I'm listening and I'll be here.
The dog's pulled it out. So there's a lot of we hear terms like neurodivergent, neurodiverse, neurospicy, and I've heard them sort of explained in different contexts. Oh my gosh, everyone, this is Teddy.
So I just thought I'd better show you how cute he is so you can understand why I'm not grumpy with him for pulling out my leads.
If you are listening to this on an audio platform, I highly recommend scooching ahead to the 50-minute mark on YouTube and having a look at Teddy, the gorgeous puppy who's currently eating Kim's neck.
Or come to my clinic, and he comes as he's a therapy dog in training. So come see me at my clinic and you can hang out with him.
He's very adorable. I can see why you don't get mad.
Yeah, so neurodiverse, neurospicy.
Yeah, so I hear neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and neurospicy. Are they all interchangeable? Are there different contexts? Can a person be neurodivergent or is a person neurodiverse? Can you unmuddy these waters for us?
I can, but I sometimes get them wrong because of my spicy brain. So neurodiverse and neurodivergent are technically not interchangeable. One is related to a group or a community of people,
right?
Neurodiverse community. Neurodivergent is a term used for someone who's differently wired.
Oh, that's 100% the opposite of what I thought. So I'm glad that I asked the question.
I could have that backwards because, my meds have worn off now.
And neurospicy?
And they're both umbrella terms.
Yeah.
So really quickly, neurodiverse, neurodivergent talks about a person or group of people whose neuropathology is different than what we may call a neurotypical wide brain. So ADHD, autism, dyslexia, sensory processing disorders, sensory issue, all those things come under that ND banner. I choose neurospicy for me because I don't do dumb shit. I make spicy decisions, and those decisions are based on how much dopamine is getting through my brain at the time, where it sits, and whether there's something shiny over there, or I'm doom scrolling on my phone, or there's a cute puppy with a supermarket bag full of something. So for me, I use the term spicy because colloquially, wherever you travel, spicy means interesting, different, different things to different people.
Yeah.
And my version of neurodivergency, like in myself, is so labile. I cover all the types of ADHD in my brain, but I'm also autistic. And those two things are like this all the time. So sometimes I love filling in like paperwork. Give me paperwork or I've got to fill in my name and address, no numbers. I'm happy. But then tomorrow, the thought of having to open a bill with words on it sends me into a complete dissociative meltdown. And other days I need structure. I need a to-do list. Tomorrow I could wake up and go, but fuck it, I'm not doing anything today. I'm going to watch Netflix, eat shit, and maybe go to the beach. Yeah. And it just depends on the day.
It sounds
I'm going to make a ton of stuff done today at home, but at work, in my job, in my office, or at my paid job with an employer, I might do nothing for 4 hours and go, I feel terrible. But I know that night I'll sit up and do it till midnight when my medication wears off and I hyper-focus. So for me, spicy means anyone who's incredibly, amazingly, differently wired to what society or the medical profession would perhaps expect should they do brain scans. And our brains are different under MRI and scanning.
Yeah, yeah.
ADHD is not a myth. It's not an excuse for poor behaviour. You don't always grow out of it. I was diagnosed at 47 and my kid was diagnosed at 9, which prompted my diagnosis.
As is often the case.
Yes. And in 99% of cases, if a child is diagnosed, at least one parent has some form of neurospiciness as well.
Someone say, I don't know where, I can't quote you the study, but I did hear someone say the other day that it's as genetic as height.
Yeah. Yep. And what happens is generationally, it comes down. And, you know, I'll use my glorious dad as an example and hope he never hears this. My dad has a family member and everyone says, oh, I bet you they've got autism, because we don't use the term Asperger's anymore, but that would have been.
Yes.
And my parents, oh, we didn't have this amount of autism when we were kids, or, you know, neurospicy. But my dad, the things I know about my dad, dinners at this time, every single day. Do you want to go for a swim today, Bobby? No, I can't, because the washing finishes in 17 minutes and I've got to hang it out before I go anywhere. Okay, you know, I'm going to eat this for breakfast every single day. I've worn these Dunlop 26 runners for like 400 years and I walk the same route every day. I only buy these rolls. I only drink this shitty coffee for 50 years. And
he just likes things the way that he likes them.
And that's how his parents were. So it's normal, isn't it? It's only when you get in a room full, like I look at my childhood and go, oh, yeah, I just behave like my dad. Now I look at the world and go,
oh, yeah, absolutely. I know a beautiful family with 3 kids on the spectrum with all variety of neurospicy diagnoses between the 3 kids. And it took until so they went through it with their eldest, obviously first, as she went through and things were coming up. And the school suggested that, you know, they go through an assessment process. And there were many things that came out in the assessment that they were like, but like, we didn't think anything of that because we do that. And then
we all do that.
As it progressed, it became apparent that both her parents are also neurospicy, but in their family unit, that was normal in inverted commas.
Yep.
And so, you know, they weren't aware that it was an issue in terms of a behavior or a thought process, or, you know, everything that she was displaying. They were like, well, that seems reasonable. I've been doing that for years.
And it is normal. It's just not the same normal as everyone else. I actually don't like the word normal, but I think for this platform it works. It's your normal.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't realize your normal is not the same as everyone else. So
there is no normal.
I spent my whole childhood knowing I didn't quite fit in. I was emotional. I didn't have good social skills. I hated parties. I got teased because I blurted stuff out or said things I didn't mean to. I didn't behave like everyone else. Lots of little things. And then I hit my 20s and I would get really overwhelmed with things, and I would change jobs every time I got good at something. I'd be like, right, what's the next challenge? And everyone kept saying, you're so highly motivated, you're such a high achiever, you're just anxious. Got to my 30s, I think there's something going on. No, you're so capable, there's nothing wrong with you. Look at you doing all these cool jobs and achieving things and studying. And I'm like, it's really hard. It's really overwhelming.
That's it, because they can't see the duck paddling under the water, right? They're just seeing you cruising on the pond, nailing life, and you're like, it's really, really difficult.
That's loud in public. And I've had people throughout my school, I just love you. You're so spontaneous. And you're like my impulsive friend, and you're so honest about stuff. But honest to the point where I'm hurting people. Yeah, your bum looks big in that. You should take it off. And then people get offended. I'm like, well, but why did you ask me?
Yeah. So, yeah.
So I didn't know that social norms meant when someone says, does my bum look big? You're supposed to say, no, you look fantastic, babe. I didn't know that being the person that goes and looks after the kids and does the dishes and tidies up at every social event I ever go to was me trying to have structure and control, where I knew the expectations and I knew the rules, and I wasn't going to get caught out with some weird social faux pas or have to do small talk.
Yes.
I thought that was normal. And so I grew up my whole life, 4 decades, nearly 5 decades, thinking that I was just socially inept and stupid and acopic. And
we're just quirky and awkward. Yeah.
And at 47, I sat in the office for 10 minutes and I was armed. I had dot points from my mum. I had school reports. I'd done stuff for 10 minutes. She goes, you know, you're ADHD, right? Here's some medication. Try that and get back to me. Like, that's not a diagnosis. I rang her 2 days later and said, hey, Jill, is this how normal people's brains work, like all the time? She said, elaborate. And I did. And she said, tell me if you want me to take that from him. She said, yes. And I fell on the floor and started crying because I finally had the moment where I went, oh, my God, I wasn't imagining it. Everything was harder for me. It really was more difficult and confusing and overwhelming. And I was constantly overstimulated, overwhelmed, anxious, worried, like all these things that I just thought everyone else just nailed and I was just useless.
And for
And I was
you,
50.
do you feel like was that a validation that it wasn't all in your head, or you weren't exaggerating, you weren't making it up, you weren't making it out to be a bigger deal than it was? There's this accept, like, oh, all the things that I feel like I've been dealing with, this is like a real thing.
Yeah, you know what? It wasn't a validation necessarily, I don't think, at the time of it's a real thing. For me, it was why did no one pick this up before?
Yeah.
Why did no one notice? Why did I spend nearly 50 years struggling, unhappy, being misdiagnosed with other things called, and I remember my mum saying to me when I was going to the appointment, why do you need a label? Like, you're nearly 50. It's not like you're going to do anything about it now. And I remember feeling really angry, but I didn't know why. And it wasn't until much later that I realised it jolted me, because a lot of people say, oh, people want to label kids and then they've got an excuse, or what do you need a label? It doesn't help. And do you know what the difference is? When I was a kid, my labels were drama queen, obnoxious, loud, inappropriate, antisocial, overbearing, overly dramatic, hypochondriac, lazy, knows better, could do better, talks too much, destroys other people's education. They were the labels I had growing up.
Yeah.
So I had to go for my self-esteem and people-pleasing as I got older. And I got that at home. I got that at my part-time casual job. I got that at school from teachers. We can talk about schools and how they destroy kids another day. So they were my labels for nearly 50 years. And suddenly I had a label that encompassed all of that in a positive light. You're just wired differently.
Yeah, wow.
That dopamine you need to make decisions and focus and get shit done is sitting at the station, but there's been an avalanche and the train can't get through. And so I was pushing that dopamine train uphill my entire life for nearly 50 years, wondering why everyone else was already over the other side.
Yeah, that's such a really great way to
And that's the difference between the positive versus negative label.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wouldn't live without medication now. And really quickly, to tie that back, what happened when I got PTSD before I did all that growth work was all those lifelong coping mechanisms, facades, all those things I'd done to protect myself and fit in and mask and not be my authentic self contributed to that moment when I didn't know who I was. Because I suddenly, when I got diagnosed, because my symptoms obviously skyrocketed when I had no coping skills, then COVID came, and I had 2 years stuck in my house with people. I didn't get to exercise. All my coping mechanisms were outside of my environment, or they were dead quiet, listening to the clock tick and just staring at the wall. And I couldn't do any of that for 2 years. And then perimenopause kicked in. So the combination of those meant that I was off the charts, could not regulate. I was angry, I was snappy, and people thought I still had PTSD. I didn't have PTSD. I don't meet any of the requirements for PTSD. I don't need medication for PTSD. I just didn't have any residual coping skills or ability to manage all that dysregulation, because that was all stripped away from me. And it got to the point where it was unmanageable. So when my kid got diagnosed, I went in going, I bet you it's not. I'm just lazy and I'm stupid and I'm a hypochondriac and I'm riding on in fact, my ex-husband accused me of riding on my kids. You're just getting a diagnosis because you didn't get one as a child and you felt unheard.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's the difference, is like, now I have a label that makes sense. And I went from angry about no one picking it up to the deep dive research to then, now I understand myself. I can actually forgive myself now. I can look back at my whole life, so pleased with myself. I can look back at my whole life now through a completely different lens, and I forgive myself because I didn't have complete autonomy over my decisions and my thoughts and my behaviors. I didn't have the capacity to regulate. I didn't have the ability to not overreact to everything from noise or, you know. And then I learned to like myself and accept myself. And now I fly that weird flag and I help other people be authentic.
Yeah. And I'd love to finish up. Thank you so much for sharing, you know, that the challenges and the, you know, the almost built-in self-talk hurdles, and, you know, there's so much that goes into self-empowerment and learning to love yourself and being compassionate towards yourself. Like, I don't want anyone to imagine this is a you know, a brief process or a magic wand. Like,
No.
I think I referred to personal growth once as it's like pulling all your skin off and then running down the street while people throw vinegar at your body, and then regrowing a new skin that's tougher because of it, right? Like, it's a big job, and it's not necessarily you know, puppies and sunshine and rainbows.
And the difference for me was in my parenting was, I don't want my kid to grow up with the same issues I had and the same self-esteem and not trusting himself. And I don't want my child to grow up with those negative labels or thinking he is his behavior. I'm not giving him a free pass. Right? It's not a free pass or an excuse, you know.
But at the same time, you're encouraging him to have that same level of self-ownership, that this is your life. You have choices about how you behave. And, you know, even within the neurodiverse parameters, there is still, you have options about how you choose to speak to me and how you choose to behave to your friends and, you know, those sorts of things. And I think, you know, I had a similar conversation with my parents about, like, oh, you just let him get away with murder and you give him everything he wants. And I'm like, well, no, like, we still are parenting within boundaries, but the boundaries are drawn differently because our kids are wired differently. You know, and I think parenting, whether your kid is diagnosed, whether you've self-diagnosed, whether your kid's neurotypical, regardless, we need to parent our children as individual human beings, which sounds radical that I can't even get it out without laughing, right? Like, wow, what a concept. Like,
you know what else? The key there too is, if you treat your child with respect and they feel safe with you, they're going to come to you and they're going to ask you questions and they're going to learn from you. That's a huge responsibility as a parent, and parenting's hard. I think if you're respectful of your child as a human being, and that's what they grow up with, that's what they're going to expect from the world. I don't buy this bullshit about, but the world's hard, we have to toughen them up. No, we actually don't. We need to hold the world to task and go, you all need to sort your shit out, because this tough love, hard, I did it, you did it, is actually not healthy. And when we explain to children why they can't do things, they're intrinsically motivated. When you say, if you do that, I'm taking your tablet for a week as the punishment, you've just threatened your child. My kid will say, if I pop that one out, he'll go, Mum, that was a threat. And I don't buy into threats. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
that's terrible. That's me reacting in the moment. I need a minute. Try again. So when we then go, mate, I need you to not light the gas burner and set fire to matchsticks when I'm not home, because the benches are wooden and the cabinetry's there. You by yourself. If the house burns down, mate, our animals could get hurt. You could get hurt. You could die. We won't have anywhere to live. If I just came home and went, "What are you doing, you little shit? Stop doing that." He hasn't learnt anything except to do it sneaky next time.
Yeah,
Or
there's no
under the
lesson.
house
And I
in
think
a
it's
pile
also
of newspaper.
kids don't have the level of foresight that adults do. They can't project into the future and examine all the what ifs. So
No.
they actually are not making decisions with all the same information that we as adults are making similar decisions. So things that seem really obvious to us, like of course you wouldn't light fires in a waste paper basket, in your house because of the things. They're not filtering that decision, that choice with all the same knowledge and information and foresight but then this will happen and then this will happen. They actually don't have all the information. So they're coming from the place that they're coming, which as far as they're concerned, they're like, cool, pretty lights, this looks awesome, right? Like whatever it is. I want to just, before we have to go, we'll definitely be getting you up for another episode. There's so many other topics,
Yeah.
that we've touched on that we could have a more in-depth conversation. I'd just love for you to share a little bit about who do you help through Oaktree coaching and how do you help them? So who do you work with and what sort of stuff do you do with them in 3 minutes or under?
Okay, so I work with anyone. I will work with anyone with any issue: adult, child, family, parent education tips and tricks, kids with emotional regulation, dealing with big feelings, kids learning to accept themselves and be authentic and not mask, and working with parents to radically accept their children as individuals and how to be collaborative and not drown in the system with the exorbitant wait lists for services. I can work with trauma. I can work with self-esteem. I can work with boundary setting. So it doesn't really matter. I'll give nearly everything a crack. My first appointment is free, specifically so that my clients and I can work out, A, if we can get along, and B, if I'm the right person. Because if I can't help you, I'm not going to take your money, and you need the freedom in that appointment to know that you can decide you don't like me either, or that I'm the person who can work with you.
You've got a lot of referral networks. Like you can definitely help people work out what that next step is if it's not you as well. So you're a great
absolutely. Yep. And I can write referrals. I can write accommodations for school, for the classroom. If your kid's struggling with specific things, parents need to step back from being offended when their child feels safer sharing with another adult, because that's not a personal thing. I'm the vault for lots of my friends' teenagers. I teach them to drive because that's when they spill the tea best. I think rather than feeling attacked and judged, no one's a perfect parent. No one gets it right. We all do things out of habit or pattern or not knowing different or not having the skills and evolution in ourselves to manage ourselves. They're not intentional. We can work on that. I think I've completely lost my train of thought, but the idea is that, if your kid's struggling and they're acting out, your kid is not the problem. Your kid has a problem. And so how do we problem solve that together? And how do I upskill you? And how do I upskill your kid and help school manage things for your kid so that your kid doesn't feel like they're a burden or they're bad or they don't feel shame? We want your kid to feel like I've got this team who are going to help me thrive and do my best in a world that's not designed for kids.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. People can find you at www.oaktreecoaching.com.au. And also, if you just search Oaktree Coaching on Facebook, you will find Kim's Facebook group, which is a community, and she also shares a lot of information in that Facebook group. So definitely reach out. All her contact details are on that website. It'll be in the show notes as well. So if you have listened to Kim and you think that's a person I need to have a further conversation with, you don't have to be local, is that correct? Like you can
No,
do
I can do
sessions
Zoom
and
and
telehealth and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, if you're not local to Gippsland, which is where Kim's based, you can still definitely reach out to her and get some very wise advice. Thank you again, the amazing Kim Savige, for joining us on today's episode of Epiphanish. I'm sure you have given people lots of Epiphanish moments today. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for the invite. Never enough time, always too many things to talk about. And if I've hurt everyone's brains today, I'm actually really glad. You don't have to like me, but as we said, you can't unhear what I said. And if it gets people reflecting on being a little bit more conscious and kind to themselves and their kids, then my job is done today. So thank you for the opportunity. Love you lots.
Excellent. Speak to you next time.